you are. So, alright, okay, so today we're talking about crisis mapping and crisis arcs. And Rose asked me also to talk a little bit about what the purpose in crisis is, because it is a little bit unclear. If you've been in a GA, it's sort of, you know your goal is to get your resolution passed, get your paper sort of passed. Sorry if I'm not using the right terminology, I don't do GAs that often, but in crisis your goal is to be an influential person in what is happening in your committee. So I think of this as sort of absolute value, like whether it's good or bad, you want to have like a big number in terms of relevance, you know? So when you're taking action, when you're passing public directives, when you're writing private directives, you want to make sure that these things, they appear in the crisis updates, that people know that these are happening. They don't have to know it's you, because like, and usually it's better that they don't, because the chair will know and the crisis staff will know that you are actively participating, you're making a difference, you're making things sort of move along. And this, again, this comes in terms of private directives, which are you write yourself, and public directives. And it's easy to sort of ignore one, so you have to find a balance of taking enough private actions as well as taking diplomatic actions and being cooperative with the people in your committee. So, So crisis mapping. So this is one of the really, really big important skills for crisis. It's one of, I guess, the two most important ones, mapping and arcs. So this is basically being able to orient yourself and form a map of your surroundings in the crisis. So this is a lot to do with performing research and like looking into the situation, looking into your character. So you want to make sure sort of that you situate yourself within the context of what's going on. And I would say, so obviously you want to have an understanding of the situation. If you're in a World War II crisis, you want to understand what's going on at the time of the war. You want to understand like what World War II, like sort of who the players are. But especially sort of your crisis mapping, the body of your research will look so different based on the characters that you are. So for example, I guess Rose, you're Dennis Rodman in like, is that an American cabinet, right?
That's the US cabinet, yeah.
Yeah, so that's gonna look a lot different from like the Secretary of the Treasury. Your research. Yeah.
I've been watching a lot of Celebrity Apprentice.
That's very different. Will not be doing that as like a foreign policy advisor. So it's so important that you look at your research from the perspective of your character, so you understand why your character is important to the situation, what they can do to make things sort of happen, whether that's like sort of make things worse for their interests or make things better. And of course, so political, economic, social, that's like the big stuff you want to know. And like just sort of like history, that's like the main three facets of like sort of historical research. This is the main three facets of like things that will be relevant for research. Crisis mapping, it also involves, there's stuff you can do in committee, so it's sort of forming your plan to accomplish a goal, and this is sort of like forming an arc as well. But when you're in committee, there's actions you can do to sort of like establish your position and establish, I guess, again, yourself within the landscape of what's going on. So here's the next slide. So yeah, again, research, we already touched on that, super important, and again, remember those two facets, your character and the situation. So context is, of course, context is key in your research, so make sure you're doing things within the context of your character. And questions during committee. So this will also help you situate yourself, because your research, it's the perfect starting point, and despite what people will tell you, you do need to be well researched for crisis. You can't just walk in with a rough understanding of a situation. And I find that there's a lot of delegates, and they're like powerful speakers, they're really creative, but sometimes they just don't know the situation that well, and that shows, because people don't always prioritize research, but like you should. So yeah, that's your launch pad. And then questions during committee. So that's when you sort of like, you can ask questions during the crisis updates to understand what's going on. Because again, the situation is changing. You won't have that covered in your research. And in the form of crisis notes. So this is sort of, oh yeah, go ahead, Rose. So
what would a really effective question look like? Like what information are you trying to gain?
So I guess you can start, obviously clarifying questions aren't the best, but if you ask, like, if they say, like, let's say for example, there's a war between like two countries and a third country enters into the war, you could maybe ask, like, do we have any information as to why they entered into the war? And this could reveal another delegate's actions. And if the crisis acts, they say, oh, we don't know, you could start an investigation in your private directives. So asking motives, asking for specifics, like, you could say, well, what capacity have they entered into the war? Have they declared war? Have they sent troops? It's all that sort of stuff, like this, you can go to like specifics, logistics, and also motives. I think those are really good things to ask about. And that'll give you obviously a lot of information, but it'll also show the staff that you're really paying attention during these updates, which makes it look really good. And crisis notes. So this has to do with sort of situating yourself within the context, within, I guess, the situation, sort of forming a place for yourself. So you can sort of write, like a lot of people, what they do is, and I do this sometimes, especially in the beginning, is you write like a letter to a made-up secretary or something like that, sort of like clarifying something about your assets or sort of initiating action. And again, like this sort of puts you like in a specific point on like the map that is a situation. So you have a starting point for all of your actions. It's sort of like the PDF, it's sort of like, it says like you're sort of like putting out feelers, you're sort of like laying out connections so that you have some avenues to go down to. And again, sort of like the preliminary foundation for an arc. But yeah, next slide. Okay, so crisis arc. So once you've established your goal and you sort of put out all these feelers, you sort of understood the situation, your position within it, the arc is basically how you get that done. So I don't know, maybe like, I'm gonna use like Rose's Dennis Rodman again, maybe like you want to defect to North Korea and like become like an important like minister there or something. I don't even know, like the possibilities are endless and that's so fun. You have to create like a plan for how to get this done. You can't just write like, I leave to North Korea and become like the like, I don't know, Minister of the Interior or something. Like, wish that's how it works, but no, unfortunately. So you have to have a plan for how you're gonna execute this. And again, whether morally good or bad, it's about influence. It's about being important in the committee. So in my Vayman committee last year, the guy who got best delegate, he was like the CIA something, but he brought like 2 countries into a war and like did a bunch of like blackmail and like framing stuff on people, and that's like really bad stuff. Like, don't do that in real life, but in a crisis, don't blackmail, don't frame people. It'll really increase your influence in committee, and people see, wow, this person like knows a lot of strategy. They're like sort of really, they're very deft at navigating the situation. But it's, and again, if you choose to do something sort of naughty, like don't like be like that in committee. Keep that private to yourself, because then they'll know. But yeah, go ahead.
So what if like you're already in like a pretty influential spot? Would you still, like, how would you go about it?
I mean, you just continue. It is easier when you already have influence. You don't have to build up your power as much. So you should still have a plan. And I think like if you're president, are you like president or something?
I'm president of like the Exxon production.
Yeah, I mean, someone may try and assassinate you. Like, I'm just gonna be real, but like that's in so many committees, especially political ones. Like the president gets assassinated. That's like the oldest trick in the book. But you want to sort of consolidate your power. And especially if you're in that, you already have the power, it's about keeping it, especially, and then like eliminate, like getting enemies sort of out of your way, or moving, again, like Exxon, moving it towards like, I guess, better standing as a company. Yeah.
Can crisis characters die, and if so, what happens to the delegates?
Good question. If you die, they will give you a new position. So if you're like assassinated, they'll just take your placard and give you another one. And like, you don't have a lot to go off of, obviously, but like they understand. But yeah, that is a fairly common thing. Yeah, go ahead.
How do you get like private directives passed? Like, do people vote on it? Like, how does that work?
It's totally individual. So as long as you're acting within your powers, like your established powers, whether that's for like powers that already exist or powers that you created for yourself, and it's sort of relevant to what the crisis staffers want to do, like that, then it gets passed. And it's all about being specific. That's like, but you don't need anybody else's input. It's all about sort of what you can do as a person.
And like when you write them out, do you address it to that same like arbitrary secretary or to the chairs?
It depends. Like you can write them sort of in the format of a directive, like bullet points, if it's something like a military strategy. But it's nice to get creative sometimes and write like to a fake secretary, like especially if you're like laying stuff out. But if you're sort of implementing stuff, you don't necessarily need to do that. Yeah.
So like a lot of times during Vayman when I was writing crisis notes to the crisis directors, so I think they often didn't know like which thing was supposed to be done when, or like sometimes when I had it on one page and it went on to the next page, I don't think they
don't look.
Went to the, so like how do you ensure that like everything gets?
It's so hard. They're so busy in those crisis rooms. Yeah. I mean, honestly, like I'm so sorry. Like all I can say to you is just be really, really specific and really neat with things. Right. If you have to go, like again, like these are people reading these things, so it's sometimes hard for them to like tell and figure stuff out. Usually, if there's a specific, you can like go ask them something, like go like ask to be called out after an update or feedback you've had. But yeah, I mean, sometimes they just like sort of mistakes sort of happen with that.
So then, to Justin's point, is it better to have a volume of directives that you're sending in, or one that is very specific and outlines? Like, if I want to get 5 different things done, am I sending 5 separate orders, or is it all in one?
One big thing. So you just have everything like point, 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 point. That'll usually help things get consolidated. And again, as specific as you can be, that's really better because then we'll know what you want. But yeah. So again, and that's sort of what an arc is. An arc consists of multiple directives. Just because it's multiple things, like as time progresses. Like you can't, usually with an arc, like, I don't know how you would do it, just like all in one directive, not that you won't have multi-point directives, but like, because an arc requires you have to get stuff, you have to put stuff places, and you have to do stuff. So it's really hard. Again, they have to approve it step by step because it's such a large scale plan. Like it's so long term. Yeah.
So going with public directives, how like so I know you have to pass it around and get people to sign it.
Yeah.
Is there like a formal like voting procedure on it, or is it just like?
Yeah. So they'll formally vote on it, just as you would like. Honestly, public directives are very, very similar to like resolutions and stuff in GAs. It'll get passed around. They'll set a number of sponsors and signatories, and a tip for that is bring like a unique color paper or pen, because oftentimes those can sit on people's workstations. Just like as people are so busy they forget passed around. But yeah, those just get voted on as anything else. But sometimes there's one for, one against. If there's a Q&A, that's just people being obnoxious, so like no Q&As with that. But yeah, all right. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
And also, do you suggest that we like start like building like have a whole lot of plans done before we would go to GA the first day, or do you usually like make it up as time goes along?
I've been more successful at like having something beforehand, just because I know what I need and I don't get as flustered, and so then it's harder for crisis staff to poke holes in what I want to do. So if you have, as much as you can have stuff laid out beforehand, but don't be scared to like, you can have multiple crisis arcs going on. I mean, usually they have like the 2-pad system, so you always have one notepad at a time.
Last time they were asking to 2-pad system, they said like 1-pad, and they changed ours to 1-pad. They changed it. What does that mean? So what does that
But basically the 1-pad, like the 2-pad note system, that's usually what's used. That means you have 2 legal pads, and like usually they're both for private directives, but it's basically like you hand one in so you can write another. So you can always have the opportunity to write something if you need to.
So the point of this conference is that like different committees affect each other, right?
Yes.
So will we be able to like, could you say write a letter to another country's cabinet and they actually receive it?
Yeah. Usually in JCCs too, you can communicate like between sides. So that's probably something you'll be able to do. Usually, I'd assume that you can. Go ahead and ask your chairs, but I'd assume that's...
My understanding, based on like my communication with the conference staff, is that yes, it's all connected. So if that's your prerogative to interact with one of the other committees, and it should be.
Yeah, that's really.
Then
that's
you hopefully will be set, but I think it'll depend on their administration of the whole thing because it is so complex.
It might just take a long time, frankly. Like you might just don't expect a response. Yeah.
So like our situation is like the conflict in the sessions. It's like some type of like next on the 2 casts.
Yeah.
So like, would it be possible to reach a consensus between the 2 crisis committees? Or is that too much?
They're probably not going to want that, but theoretically, yes. I wouldn't try for that because like crisis stuff, like they always are trying to put out like more drama, more like bad things happening. It's so rare that crisis will resolve, so that I wouldn't assume that that's the case. But feel free to try for that if that's what you want to do. And as president, it would maybe make sense. But yeah, all right, next slide. Okay, yeah, so a good crisis arc, it's very clear in sort of your format, like you have a plan. That's basically how you make this thing sort of actualize itself very well. So the 3 parts of it are acquisition, allocation, and execution. So acquisition is sort of that first part, like you're writing to your staff members, or you're gathering resources, you're taking account of your assets, you're sort of forming like organizations to help you, stuff like that. You're sort of laying the groundwork for this thing that's gonna happen. And allocation, that's sort of like, it's kind of a step, but it's sort of where you start putting things places. I guess, for me, like, I sort of see it mostly as like acquisition and execution, but allocation, I guess, like, especially that's like sort of where you send resources to places. So you get everything very well set up so that it's not super hard to execute, so that there's not a lot of loose ends, so it can be tied off very neatly. And relevant to the progressive committee, if they're not passing a lot of your directives, it's probably because they don't think it's relevant to what they want to do.
When you say they, do you mean the committee or do you mean crisis staff?
Crisis staff. Yeah, sorry, that's good clarification. But yeah, no, crisis staff will sometimes, like, I asked them once about one of my things, and they're like, oh yeah, we just didn't want to do that. Like, we didn't think it was relevant. So as much as you can, like, get a sense of, like, where the committee is going and where the updates are going, that'll help you keep it relevant. But yeah.
Would it be appropriate to write, like, out-of-character things in personal directives? Or?
Yeah, you've got to stick to your character. You can ask, I guess, like a clarifying question, something like that. But yeah, no, you want to stick to your character. Like, you want to be authentic. Like, don't go super, like, I guess, out of, because they don't like that, because that shows you're not really well researched, you're not really well prepared. And career tracks well, because people are going to try and foil your plans because it's going to help them win awards, and and maybe your plans are counter to their plans, but make sure you're hiring bodyguards, you're training your spies well, stuff like that. As much as you can keep things a secret, it's better. Like don't be too like bold to claim credit for something, because like then someone will inevitably try and like spoil it.
So for the 2-pad thing, so if you have one directive that kind of follows from another directive, how will they know what you're talking about? Because if they don't have your other pad, they can't really reference it, right? So
that can be a challenge. Again, as much context as you can include in specifics. And what I try and do is if I have like multiple plans going on, I try and keep one to one pad and one to the other. But yeah.
How does timing come into play? Like, what prevents me from just going in and writing down all of my directives that I want to accomplish and sending them in at the beginning?
I guess the issue with that is if they find one to like, if they find a problem in one, that could potentially mess up your entire plan. And also, if your plan is sort of like fast forwarded as opposed to like time in committee is passing, then like if there's like a crisis update, they could potentially change things. The goal is sort of keeping the timelines all very consistent. So if you have a bunch of plans and that sort of like goes ahead and there would be potentially like an update that would change things, then that would be problematic. But again, as much as you like, planning is the best. Just like sort of knowing what you want to do and finding out the best time to do it would be helpful. But yeah. And alright, so I guess we're good with that one. But yeah, okay, so this is I guess an example of plotting an arc. So I guess my example, it's sort of hard to think of when you don't have context, but let's just say that if you're starting a revolution within a country, and this could be for multiple goals. Maybe you want to bring like some like pro-war party into power so they can jump into a war, or maybe you just don't like this country and you want to destabilize it. Like I don't judge, like all valid reasons. But so starting for acquire, I guess that's when you sort of start to gather your resources. So you find supporters, you create a party, you collect funds, you get weapons. That's really important for, I guess, a revolution, obviously, and you train people. And money is tough to acquire in crisis. I honestly don't have a good answer as to how to get money. I mean, you can write to like made up people almost that have money. Like if there's someone who's not in your committee, like the treasury of another country, you could write to them and ask for money. Again, the issue with that, you just have to justify it. And training people, they're going to let you do stuff like that. Usually pretty, yeah.
So with this, you're talking about all this stuff. So like in the crisis committee I was in at Vayman, a lot of people had kind of passed public directives that seemed like not really to have to do with any arc. It was just like put up propaganda posters or like lower taxes, and it seems like it didn't really affect the committee at all. So should you avoid stuff like that?
I mean, yeah, I would say definitely avoid stuff like that unless it's part of a larger plan. Like, don't just like.
Yeah, in theory, it was supposed to be like to like help the peasants or whatever, but it seemed not really to actually do anything.
Yeah, no, that gets. But you're right. I mean, a lot of that happens a lot in crisis. People be like, oh, like propaganda. I know there's like I've seen a lot of like, oh, like let's help the soldiers like feel like better after the war, like stuff like that. It's very abstract. I mean, you're not gonna like that. You need to do this stuff with a very deliberate plan. That's sort of the best. But yeah.
So let's say like in your like the character summary that they give you, like from there. So it says like I don't know, like this guy likes me, or like this guy doesn't really align with like the values of the company, and like, but like he puts up a show. It's like, oh, I do like the company. So in your public directives, would you be able to like support the cause? But like in your private, try to undermine it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good strategy. A lot of the times, like you can't obviously publicly undermine something, otherwise they'll like kick you out of your position, which again they could do. But privately, you can totally work to undermine something, even if you support it in public. Like you're allowed to be kind of snaky in this sense, but even though that's like don't do that in real life. But yeah. So allocation again, this is just sort of where you put everything into place. So this could be moving troops, something like that. In this situation, moving your like trained revolutionary personnel. You could be printing propaganda, or that could be required. I mean, it's sort of, you can have people run for office or start to gain like a grassroots level, like just sort of get things into place so that once you like press that button, your revolution is successful. And again, execution, you could say like, oh, we assassinate you could try and like a leader gets assassinated, and because you put into place like distrust for the government, military operatives, propaganda, people have already run for office, then the revolution will almost just happen like on its own, but obviously you did this. You could get support for a coup, something like that. Again, knock out the government and have your people take its place, or even like start a war. I mean, I would suggest probably doing that. Like if your revolutionaries are well trained, you could just have them start a war, because it's a lot easier, I guess, to directly accomplish than like saying like, oh, just assassinate this leader. They're gonna poke a lot fewer holes, I would say, something that's a little bit less specific and less like direct. But yeah, so that would again just be a sample of an arc. And sort of again, just have what you want to do in mind before you go into the crisis of sort of so you can know like how you want this arc to progress, because it gets really hard to like check off all your boxes when you're sort of flustered in a committee. And that's where most arcs sink. It's because people just were not specific enough. So that would be, I guess, again, my last thing to you. And also, if you have an arc that you're thinking of, something you're considering, like feel free to email me, run it by me, something like that, so I can, I don't know, like give you some support with that, maybe suggest some steps you could take, and just tell you, I guess, I don't know, yeah, any help with that. But yeah, any final questions as we wrap this up? Yeah.
So like creating an arc isn't writing directly itself. It's just like an outline.
No, just an outline, because they frown like pre-written resolutions. They frown upon pre-written directives. So yeah.
Okay, so if you're like someone in the committee who's not holding a position of like a lot of power, is it okay to like leech off of someone who does? Like,
Yeah, no, I mean that's actually I guess a really good point about forming allies and blocks in crisis. Your blocks are never going to be permanent. Your allies are never going to be permanent. It's kind of like use them and lose them a little bit, and it's been done to me. Like I've been used and lose, if you will, like in crisis, just because like people are snaky, so you don't want to get too attached to people. You don't want to become too dependent on people, but you're definitely allowed to like. If you agree on something, like maybe co-write a joint private directive, which is like two people's covert powers combined into one sort of piece of action. But yeah.
Another thing though, that if you also don't have much power, you could like act like dumb or something like that. Act like you just don't like know anything that's going on, and use other people to try to pass your stuff.
I don't.
A guy did that like at our meeting last time.
What do you mean by that?
Like he literally was like, "Oh, it's my first conference." And
oh, don't do that. That's so sneaky.
Hate that.
He won one of the awards.
Yeah, hate that. Anyone who openly says it's their first conference, I can guarantee is not their first conference.
Don't do that. Yeah, don't pretend to be like, oh. But actually, if you want, like, you can let yourself kind of get used as a, like, this is just it's a hard situation to come back to, because if you let yourself get used by a pawn by some powerful delegates, like just make sure, like, how are you gonna get out of that situation realistically? Like, there's this one kid in my committee. He got like sort of put in vice president position, and obviously that's a position of a lot of power, but he was used as a puppet, so it didn't make him look that good because he was just a puppet leader. Like he was just the guy that they picked to like, I don't know, sit in the desk. Like that's not that cool, like no offense. But so you want to make sure that you're doing stuff like taking your own actions, not letting yourself get used, even if it seems like it's a lot of power. And yeah, also like that's like bad practice. Like don't lie about conference experience. Yeah. But yeah, all right, are we good on questions? Good. And again, feel free to email me if you have any more concerns. I send my email out in an email from the MUN email. So yeah, there we go. Thanks, guys.